Dad's silent revenge.
Beverly, and I drove up to Quebec to look at a cottage for sale. A French-speaking couple was selling it. I stayed quiet, pretending I didn't understand a word of French, and then I heard one sentence that made my blood run cold. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My name is Trevor Garrison. I'm 59 years old. And this is the story of how I discovered my wife's betrayal through a language she thought I couldn't understand. I closed the bedroom door and pulled out a worn French textbook from beneath my fishing magazines in the nightstand drawer. The pages were filled with my careful handwriting, sticky notes marking difficult verb conjugations. I turned on the small reading lamp, angling it away from the door so the light wouldn't show through the crack, and opened my notebook. In the living room, my wife Beverly was watching one of her reality shows. The volume was loud enough that I knew she wouldn't disturb me for at least an hour. This had been my routine for 18 months now. Every evening when Beverly was absorbed in her programs or out at her book club, I sat down with my textbooks and language apps. At first, it was just curiosity. After I retired from my position as a construction manager here in Ohio, I found myself with endless hours and nothing to fill them. But there was something deeper driving me. My first wife, Linda, had been Canadian. Her grandmother was from Quebec, and Linda always talked about visiting the French-speaking parts of Canada. We never got the chance before the cancer took her 6 years ago. Learning French felt like honoring her memory, keeping that dream alive somehow. I told Beverly nothing about my studies. After our marriage 3 years ago, I'd mentioned wanting to take a woodworking course at the community center. She'd laughed so hard her wine nearly came out her nose. "Trevor, you're almost 60 years old," she'd said, not even looking up from her phone. "You'll hurt yourself with the power tools. Besides, we don't have room for another hobby you'll abandon in a month." I haven't abandoned anything. I tried to object. "You said the same thing about golf, about photography, about that drone you bought. Face it, Trevor, you're not a hobby person. Just watch your sports and let me handle the interesting things." Back then, I'd stayed silent, but the sting of her words settled deep inside. And when 6 months later I thought about signing up for a photography club, I didn't even bother mentioning it. I knew what she'd say. Since then, I stopped sharing my interest with her. What was the point if she'd just mock them anyway? It was as if I'd become invisible in my own home. Beverly decided where we vacationed, which was always somewhere she wanted to go. She decided what furniture to buy, when to have her friends over, and what renovations needed doing. I worked in the garden, fixed things around the house, agreed with her plans, and sometimes tried to suggest alternatives, but she'd wave me off. "Trevor, I know better. You don't understand design. Let me handle it." And I retreated time after time until I got used to being a background character in my own life. I poured myself some tea from a thermos I kept specifically in the bedroom so I wouldn't have to go to the kitchen and attract attention. I settled into my armchair and immersed myself in the exercises, pronouncing words in a whisper, checking my pronunciation through an app on my phone with earbuds in. I liked the feeling of having a secret, something of my own that Beverly didn't know about and didn't control. It was my little space of freedom in a world where everything else had long ceased to belong to me. About an hour later, laughter drifted in from the living room. Some dramatic moment on her show, probably. Beverly was commenting loudly, maybe on the phone with her son Bradley. I could hear her animated voice, her giggles. She hadn't laughed like that with me in years. I sighed and returned to my textbook, trying not to think about how much our marriage had changed. When Beverly and I got married 3 years ago, everything seemed completely different. I was lonely after Linda's death, and Beverly was warm and interested in my opinions. Together we dreamed about the future, took long drives through the countryside, made plans, and laughed at silly things. She called me her rock and said I was the best thing that ever happened to her after her difficult divorce. I believed every word. I was happy just to be near her, listening to her dreams about traveling, buying a cottage up north, watching my daughter grow up. But over the months, something shifted. Beverly became harder, more critical. My daughter Melissa grew up and moved to Portland for work. And once she was gone, it was like the glue that held our blended family together dissolved. Beverly started spending more time with her friends, her clubs, her activities. I became an afterthought. Her son Bradley, who worked in finance up in Montreal, visited maybe twice a year. Phone calls were brief, perfunctory. He always seemed closer to his mother, sharing inside jokes I didn't understand, speaking in a kind of shorthand I wasn't part of. Beverly had made it clear that Bradley was brilliant with money, much smarter than me about investments and financial planning. He handles complex portfolios. She'd remind me whenever I questioned their advice about consolidating our accounts. I'd worked hard my whole life in construction, saved diligently, invested wisely. We had a comfortable retirement, the house was paid off, and I had a healthy pension and investment portfolio from 35 years of steady work. But Beverly never missed an opportunity to remind me that her previous husband had left her well provided for. "I'm not some desperate widow," she'd say when we argued. "I chose to marry you, Trevor. Don't forget that. We had talked about buying a cottage somewhere peaceful for retirement. I mentioned how Linda had always dreamed of visiting Quebec, how beautiful the French-Canadian countryside was supposed to be. Beverly surprised me by embracing the idea enthusiastically. Bradley found a listing, she told me one evening, more animated than she'd been in months. A French-speaking couple is selling their cottage near Lac Beauport, just outside Quebec City. Stunning property. Bradley thinks it's a great investment and it would give us a reason to visit him more often in Montreal. I nodded, genuinely pleased. That sounds wonderful, Beverly. When can we see it? Next weekend? Bradley will meet us there. He'll handle the negotiations since, they're French speakers. I didn't mention that I now understood French quite well. I just smiled and said that sounded like a good plan. The following days, I studied harder than ever. I reviewed real estate vocabulary, legal terms, anything that might come up in the conversation. I wasn't sure why I felt the need to keep my knowledge secret, but something inside told me it was important. Some vague unease and intuition I couldn't quite name. Maybe I wanted to see how they talked about things when they thought I couldn't understand. Maybe I was just tired of being on the outside of every decision. Or maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't as useless and incapable as Beverly seemed to think. I barely slept the night before the trip. Beverly snored softly beside me, taking up most of the bed as usual. I lay on my sliver of mattress staring at the ceiling, thinking about what tomorrow might bring. What would I hear, and was I ready for it? In the morning, we left early. The cottage was a 5-hour drive from Ohio to Quebec. Bradley was meeting us there, having driven down from Montreal, in the car. Beverly was on her phone most of the time, texting, scrolling through social media. I drove in silence, occasionally glancing at the autumn colors along the highways. "You're quiet," Beverly said somewhere past the border. "Just focused on driving?" "Don't be nervous about the cottage, Trevor. Bradley will handle everything. You just need to nod and smile. The sellers don't speak much English anyway." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, but said nothing. We arrived at Lac Beauport around 2:00 in the afternoon. The area was beautiful. Trees ablaze with red and gold, the lake sparkling in the autumn sun. The cottage sat on a generous lot, classic Quebec style, with a steep metal roof and wraparound porch overlooking the water. Bradley's silver BMW was already there. He walked out to greet us, tall and polished in his expensive charcoal coat, looking more like a Montreal businessman than my stepson. At 35, he had that confident air that came from success in finance, perfectly styled hair and designer glasses that probably cost more than my monthly pension. "Mom, Trevor," he hugged Beverly warmly, then gave me a brief, perfunctory handshake. "How was the drive?" "Long," Beverly said, stretching, "but worth it." "Look at this place, Bradley. It's even more beautiful than the photos. Wait till you see inside." I've already talked with the Dubois family. They're lovely people. Very motivated to sell because they're moving closer to their grandchildren in Quebec City. We walked toward the cottage together. I noticed Bradley and Beverly exchanging a look I couldn't quite read, something that passed between them that made me feel like an outsider. The sellers, Jean-Pierre and Colette Dubois, were waiting at the front door. They were in their mid-60s like us, with warm smiles and the easy hospitality of people who'd spent their lives welcoming guests to cottage country. Jean-Pierre wore a comfortable sweater and had the weathered hands of someone who worked outdoors, while Colette had gray hair pulled back neatly and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Bienvenue," Jean-Pierre stepped forward, shaking Bradley's hand first, then turning to me with an extended palm. "Jean-Pierre Dubois," he said with a slight accent. "Trevor Garrison," I replied in English, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for having us." Jean-Pierre's English was limited, so Bradley jumped in immediately, switching to rapid, fluent French. I caught every word but kept my face carefully blank, playing the role of the typical American tourist who couldn't understand the local language. "This is my mother," Beverly Bradley was saying in French to the Dubois couple, "and my stepfather, Trevor. He doesn't speak French, so I'll translate everything for him." Jean-Pierre nodded warmly at me, and I smiled back, playing the part of the uncomprehending Anglophone perfectly. Inside, though, I was alert to every nuance of the conversation. Colette led us inside, and I had to admit, the cottage was absolutely stunning. The main room featured high vaulted ceilings with exposed wooden beams, a massive fieldstone fireplace that dominated one wall, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the lake. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass, casting warm patterns on the polished hardwood floors. "Magnifique," Beverly murmured, using one of the few French words she knew. Bradley translated for the Dubois family, adding his own commentary about the craftsmanship and architectural details. I listened carefully to every word, noting how smoothly he spoke French, how comfortable he seemed in this role as the family's linguistic intermediary. The tour continued through the cottage. 3 bedrooms, each with its own character and charm, 2 full bathrooms with modern fixtures, a finished basement that included a temperature-controlled wine cellar, and finally the piece de resistance, a waterfront deck with a private dock extending into the clear waters of Lac Beauport. C'est parfait pour une famille, Colette said, speaking directly to Beverly but including me with a kind smile and gesture toward the lake. Your family will love it here, Bradley translated smoothly, perfect for entertaining, for quiet retreats, for making memories. But I was starting to notice something unsettling. When Jean-Pierre mentioned that the property taxes had increased recently due to improvements in the area, Bradley didn't bother translating that information to us. When Colette explained that the septic system, while functional, was older and might need some attention within the next few years, Bradley's translation to us was simply, everything is in excellent condition, very well maintained. I filed these discrepancies away in my mind, keeping my expression neutral and interested, just another American retiree admiring a beautiful property. We gathered in the comfortable living room around a rustic coffee table that Jean-Pierre had clearly crafted himself. Colette brought coffee in delicate porcelain cups and a plate of butter tarts, apologizing in French that they were store-bought rather than homemade. Please don't apologize, I said in English, accepting a cup. This is very kind of you. The conversation flowed in French between Bradley and the Dubois family, with Bradley providing occasional translations to Beverly and me. Though I noticed he barely looked at me during these exchanges, directing most of his attention to his mother. Then the discussion turned to the serious business of the sale. Jean-Pierre leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped, and named a price. It was substantial, $485,000, but fair for such a property in this desirable area of Quebec. I had done enough research to know that waterfront cottages in Lac Beauport were in high demand. Bradley nodded thoughtfully, then began negotiating in French. I watched my stepson work, and I had to admit he was skilled. He was smooth and confident, citing recent market conditions, comparable sales in the area, current interest rates. His approach was professional but not aggressive, respectful of the sellers, while clearly advocating for a better deal. Jean-Pierre listened carefully, occasionally glancing at his wife Colette for silent consultation. They would murmur together in rapid French, weighing Bradley's points. Finally, after about 20 minutes of back and forth, they settled on a price of $425,000, about 12% below the asking price. The men shook hands across the coffee table. We have a deal, Bradley announced in English, turning to Beverly with a satisfied smile. Now we just need to discuss the paperwork and closing details. Beverly clapped her hands together. Wonderful. Oh, Trevor, can you imagine our weekends here? The peace and quiet, the beautiful sunsets over the lake. I smiled and nodded, but something cold was settling in my stomach. Throughout the entire negotiation, not once had Bradley looked at me for approval or input. It was as if I wasn't even part of the decision-making process. Jean-Pierre spoke again, and what he said made my ears prick up and my heart start to race. Pour l'acte de propriété, he said in French, looking between Bradley and Beverly. Est-ce que ce sera au nom des trois, ou seulement au nom de votre mère et vous? For the deed, he was asking, will it be in all three names or just your name and your mother's? I felt a chill run through me from head to toe. I kept my eyes fixed on my coffee cup, my face carefully blank, while my mind raced. Bradley glanced quickly at Beverly, and I saw something pass between them, a look of understanding, of shared knowledge that excluded me completely. Then Bradley answered in French, speaking more quickly than before, clearly assuming I couldn't understand a single word. Juste au nom de ma mère et moi, he said. Mon beau-père n'a pas besoin d'être sur le titre. Il vieillit, vous comprenez? Des problèmes de mémoire. Nous nous occupons de ses affaires maintenant. C'est plus simple ainsi. Just in my mother's name and mine. My stepfather doesn't need to be on the title, he's getting older, you understand? Memory issues. We're handling his affairs now. It's simpler this way. Memory issues. Handling his affairs, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut by a sledgehammer. The coffee cup trembled slightly in my hands, and I had to set it down carefully on the table. Jean-Pierre looked visibly uncomfortable with this information. His brow furrowed as he glanced at me, then back to Bradley. Mais ne devrait-il pas, he began, but shouldn't he? Beverly interrupted, speaking in her broken elementary French. Mon mari ne comprend pas les choses simples. My husband doesn't understand simple things. She was calling me simple to strangers, in a language she assumed I didn't know. The woman I had married, trusted, shared my bed and my life with for 3 years was describing me as mentally deficient to people we'd just met. Bradley nodded along enthusiastically, expanding on his mother's assessment in fluent French. Trevor a toujours été un peu détaché, vous savez, c'est un bon homme, mais pas très vif. Nous gérons les choses depuis un moment maintenant. Si chalet va vraiment aider parce que, eh bien, éventuellement, nous pourrions avoir besoin de regarder les établissements de soins. Et voir les actifs au bon noms facilite tout. Trevor's always been a bit checked out, you know? He's a good man, but not very sharp. We've been managing things for a while now. This cottage will really help because, well, eventually we might need to look at care facilities. Having assets in the right names makes everything easier. Care facilities, they were planning to put me away. Not someday in the distant future when I might actually need care, but soon. This cottage purchase was part of a plan to manage me, to control me, to eventually warehouse me somewhere convenient. Jean-Pierre and Colette exchanged an uncomfortable glance. I could see the unease in their faces. Jean-Pierre shifted in his chair and spoke carefully. Je vois. Bien, nous ne sommes que des vendeurs ici. Comment vous structurez vos arrangements familiaux, c'est votre affaire, I see. Well, we're just sellers here. How you structure your family arrangements is your business. Exactement. Bradley smiled brightly, as if they just discussed something as mundane as the weather.
Alors, Devon's Nuss, fixer, undate, pour finalizer? Exactly. So, shall we set a date to finalize? I don't remember much of the rest of the conversation.
I sat in stunned silence, which they probably attributed to my supposed mental decline. Beverly and Bradley continued chatting with the Dubois family, making plans, exchanging contact information, laughing about the quirks of cottage life and the beauty of Quebec in different seasons. I smiled when someone smiled at me, nodded when it seemed appropriate, and felt like I was watching my life collapse from outside my own body. Every so often, Colette would glance at me with what looked like sympathy, and I wondered if she suspected that I understood more than I was letting on. When we finally stood to leave, Jean-Pierre shook my hand warmly and spoke to me directly in careful English. I hope you will be very happy here, Mr. Garrison. It is a special place. Thank you, I managed to say. It's beautiful. But inside I was thinking that I would never be happy here because this place wasn't meant for me at all. It was meant to be part of my prison. The drive back to Ohio was torture. Bradley had headed back to Montreal, promising to handle all the paperwork and legal arrangements. Beverly sat in the passenger seat, humming contentedly, scrolling through photos of the cottage on her phone. Wasn't that wonderful, Trevor? She said about an hour into the drive. Such a beautiful property, and Bradley really knows how to negotiate. We got an excellent deal, whose names will be on the deed. I asked carefully, keeping my voice level. She didn't look up from her phone. Bradley's handling all that legal stuff. Don't worry about the details, Trevor. You know you get confused by legal things. I'm not confused. I'm asking a simple question. Something in my tone made her look up from her phone. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Why are you being difficult? It'll be fine. Bradley knows what he's doing. I wanted to confront her right then, to tell her I'd understood every word of their conversation, every dismissive comment, every casual cruelty. But something held me back. I needed to think, to plan, to understand the full scope of what they were doing. So I stayed silent for the rest of the drive, letting her assume I was just being my usual passive self. We got home late that night. Beverly went straight to bed, exhausted from the drive. I sat in the kitchen in the dark drinking bourbon and staring at nothing. 3 years. 3 years I'd given this woman. I'd opened my home to her, trusted her with my finances, believed we were building something together. And this was how she repaid me, by calling me simple, by planning to shuffle me into a care home, by stealing my retirement. The next morning, I called in sick to the golf game I had scheduled with my old work friends. Instead, I drove to the Hamilton County Public Library, found a quiet corner in the reference section, and started researching power of attorney, elder abuse, asset protection, financial fraud. The more I read, the colder I felt. Beverly had been positioning herself for this for years. The consolidated accounts, the way she'd taken over paying the bills to give me one less thing to worry about, the subtle implications to friends and family that Trevor was slowing down, forgetting things. I found a lawyer, not our family attorney who Beverly had known for decades, but a new one. A woman named Sarah Mitchell who specialized in elder law and had excellent reviews online. Her office was in downtown Cincinnati, far enough from our suburb that I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her face growing grimmer as my story unfolded. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Garrison, what you're describing is unfortunately more common than people realize. Financial elder abuse by family members. It's insidious because it often happens gradually, and the victim doesn't recognize it until significant damage has been done. What can I do? First, we need to understand your current legal and financial situation. Do you have access to your account statements? Do you know if any powers of attorney have been signed? I felt a chill. Beverly gave me some papers to sign about 15 months ago. She said it was for our estate planning. I trusted her. I signed without reading everything carefully. Sarah nodded slowly. We need to get copies of those documents immediately. If she has broad power of attorney over your finances and health decisions, she could potentially do exactly what you overheard them discussing. That afternoon, I went to our bank. I was calm, polite, just an elderly man checking on his accounts. The young woman at the customer service desk was helpful, pulling up our records with a few clicks on her computer. My name was still on the joint accounts, but there was also activity I'd never authorized, small, steady transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. When I asked about them, the representative explained they were automatic transfers Beverly had set up for better interest rates and investment opportunities. I requested copies of everything, explaining that I was organizing our financial records for tax purposes. The bank employee didn't question it. Then I went to our family lawyer's office, claiming I needed copies of our estate documents for insurance purposes. The receptionist, who'd known me for 15 years, handed them over without hesitation. That night, I spread everything out on the kitchen table after Beverly went to bed. The power of attorney was there just as I'd feared. I'd signed it 15 months ago, giving Beverly authority over my financial and health decisions in the event of incapacity. But the language was vague, almost deliberately so. There was no clear definition of what incapacity meant, no requirement for medical certification before she could invoke it. Sarah Mitchell called me the next morning after reviewing the documents I'd scanned and emailed to her. "This is very concerning," she said bluntly. "That power of attorney is not standard. The language is too broad, and there are missing safeguards. You need to act quickly but carefully. If your wife realizes you're aware of her plans, she might accelerate her timeline. What do you suggest? First, we revoke that power of attorney. You have the absolute legal right to do that while you're mentally competent. Then, we need to protect your assets, separate your finances, and document everything that's happened." I spent the next 2 weeks living a double life. At home, I was the same old Trevor, quiet, agreeable, watching football, working in the garage. Beverly continued with her plans, oblivious to my newfound awareness. Meanwhile, I was working with Sarah to unwind the trap my wife and stepson had built around me. I revoked the power of attorney. I opened new accounts in my name, only at a different bank, and began transferring my share of our assets. I documented every step carefully and legally. I gathered evidence, bank statements, the power of attorney document, and recordings of my own mental competence. Through cognitive assessments Sarah arranged with a geriatrician named Dr. Miller. The doctor, a kind man who specialized in memory disorders, put me through a comprehensive battery of tests. Memory, reasoning, problem-solving, language skills, Mr. Garrison. He said at the end, smiling broadly, "Your cognitive function is excellent, well above average for your age group. I see no signs of decline whatsoever. Your mind is as sharp as someone 20 years younger." I had him put it in writing with detailed test results and his professional letterhead. The day came when I was ready to confront them. Bradley was visiting for the weekend, supposedly to finalize the cottage paperwork. They needed my signature on several documents. We were sitting in the living room, Beverly and Bradley on the couch, me in my recliner. Bradley had papers spread on the coffee table like he was conducting a business meeting. "Just sign here, Trevor," Bradley said, sliding a document toward me. "And here, it's just standard stuff. Transfer agreements, liability waivers, that sort of thing." I picked up the papers and began reading them carefully, thoroughly. Bradley shifted impatiently in his seat. "Trevor, you don't need to read all that. It's boilerplate legal language." I explained what it is. "I'd like to understand what I'm signing," I said calmly. Margaret and Bradley exchanged that look again, the one that excluded me, that treated me like a child or an inconvenience. "Trevor, don't be difficult," Beverly said, her voice taking on an edge. Bradley explained everything. "Just sign so we can move forward," I continued reading. The document was a transfer of assets written in dense legal language, but I understood it perfectly thanks to Sarah's coaching. If I signed this, I'd be giving up my claim to half our joint investments and agreeing that the cottage would be purchased with no financial contribution from me, meaning no ownership rights. There was also a second document, a voluntary admission to a luxury retirement community in Columbus, contingent on a family determination of need. I set the papers down carefully on the coffee table. "I'm not signing these." The silence in the room was absolute. Bradley's face went completely blank. Beverly's eyes narrowed to slits. "Excuse me," she said. "I said I'm not signing, and I think we need to have a serious conversation about what's really going on here." "Trevor, what are you talking about?" Bradley leaned forward, his tone shifting to something I recognized from when he was a child caught in a lie. "I'm talking about the cottage, the one you're planning to buy with money from our joint accounts, but only putting in your names and your mother's." Beverly's face went pale. "Trevor, you're confused." "Je ne suis pas confus," I said quietly, and watched both of them freeze like deer in headlights. "I'm not confused." The silence stretched on forever. Beverly's mouth opened and closed without sound. Bradley looked like he'd been slapped. You speak French?" Beverly finally managed to whisper, "I've been learning for 18 months. I understood every word of your conversation with the Dubois family, every word about how Trevor is getting older, has memory issues, needs to be managed, every word about care facilities and putting assets in the right names." Bradley stood up abruptly. "Trevor, you're misunderstanding. I heard you call me not sharp. I heard your mother call me simple." I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "I heard you planning to exclude me from the cottage purchase, from our finances, from decisions about my own life." "Trevor, this is ridiculous." Beverly stood too, her voice rising. "We were trying to protect you. You were planning to put me in a home," I continued. "Not because I need care, but because I'm inconvenient. Because you want my money for your cottage and your comfortable retirement." I stood up and faced them both. "I've had a full cognitive assessment, Dr. Miller at Cincinnati General, above average function for my age group. No signs of decline." I pulled the report from my jacket pocket and placed it on the table. "I've also revoked the power of attorney you had me sign, and I've separated our finances. My assets are now in accounts you don't have access to. You can't do that." Beverly's voice went shrill. "That's our money. Half of it is my money, and I have every legal right to protect it." The next few months were difficult. Beverly contested everything, denied everything, hired her own lawyer, and tried to paint me as a paranoid old man having a breakdown. But I had documentation. I had recordings from that day at the cottage. I had bank statements showing the money she'd been moving. I had Dr. Miller's assessment. The divorce was finalized in spring. Beverly got her fair share, legally determined, but nothing more. She moved to Pennsylvania to be closer to her sister. Through mutual friends, I heard she told everyone I'd gone crazy in my old age. Bradley didn't speak to me for almost a year. Then one day, a letter arrived, handwritten, pages long, stained with what looked like tears in places. It was an apology, an explanation that didn't excuse but helped me understand. He'd been struggling financially, hadn't wanted to admit it, and his mother had convinced him this was the solution. "We meet for coffee once a month now. We're not close, maybe never will be again, but we're talking." That's something I did buy a cottage in Quebec eventually, a smaller place, perfect for one person, bought with my own money and my own name. I furnished it simply and spent weekends there reading, practicing French with the neighbors, and remembering Linda without the shadow of betrayal hanging over everything. In my French conversation group back in Ohio, I met Joyce Williams, a 56-year-old retired school principal. She's warm and funny, with silver hair and a laugh that makes me smile. We're taking things slowly, but it feels right. Sometimes I think about Beverly, about those years I spent trying to be what she wanted, shrinking myself to fit her expectations. I wasted so much time being invisible in my own life, but I don't regret learning French. That secret skill saved me. It showed me the truth I needed to see, even when the truth was devastating. And it taught me something else, something I try to remember every day. It's never too late to learn something new. It's never too late to become someone you didn't know you could be. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's simply becoming who you were meant to be all along. Learning a language didn't just give me words. It gave me the power to hear my own worth through the eyes of those who tried to steal it from me. The greatest betrayal isn't what people do to you behind your back, but what they say about you to your face in a language they think you can't understand.